Let's explore.
Why hello! Welcome to another video. Thank you for joining me. It's come to my attention that with my YouTube channel I can pretty much make whatever I want, and then people can check it out if they're interested or not. So I figured what sounds pretty fun is doing a sort of first impressions for the early access of Baldur's Gate 3, a game I've been enjoying quite a bit with about 28 hours of playtime. Want to reflect a little bit on what I think of the game, maybe the occasional critique or two of the early access, and then maybe review the full game when I have enough time with it. That's supposed to release on August 31st, which is pretty exciting. The early access has been going on for about 2 years, so I'm really curious to see how it's going to turn out, but so far from what I've played, it's pretty great. So, I'm quite a fan of Dungeons & Dragons. I attempted to play 4th edition of the game with the box set that comes with it, but I didn't really grasp the rules fully, and my friends and I didn't either, so we mainly just kept moving the pieces around and using the pre-made characters. It was pretty cool. But it was 5th edition where I actually started to learn how to play the game properly, and a couple of buddies of mine formed a friendship because we all played Dungeons & Dragons together. We still keep in contact to this day, and in fact, a couple of those buddies and I had played Baldur's Gate just yesterday, and I figured after playing that, hit the iron while it's hot, I want to talk about it while I'm feeling pretty jovial about the whole subject. Dungeons & Dragons pretty sweet, and Baldur's Gate is attempting to recreate that feeling of adventure that a campaign can provide for you, doing it solo, but it does have multiplayer aspects where you can do a party all together, but if you don't, it's a solid single-player experience. If you've seen on the channel, I actually covered the first game. I did it first with the story mode, which may not make me a real gamer, but I really did want to learn, I believe it was Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, and that rule set is, let us call it, complex at best. But I'm sure some people really like it, so if they do, more power to them, that's awesome. So I played the first game and completed it with 2 characters. I made a rogue and I made a paladin, and playing paladin was pretty cool just because you had to keep to a rule set, which some people say paladins are kind of annoying or very vanilla. And I can totally get that, but I like the idea of trying to keep your convictions, and if you sway from there, then you lose your powers, but you can be an oathbreaker, so it changes the flavor of it. I think it's pretty cool. It's a fun role-playing idea to get into that mindset and make sure you're following the rules of that class. And then I played the second game, which I still haven't completed. I've put about as much time as I did in the first one, but I figured I'd play it on normal mode. That's been kind of funky just because I keep reloading quite a bit. I'm not very good at the game. But Baldur's Gate 3 has been pretty awesome because while the first 2 games were adapting Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, this one is adapting the 5th edition, and I think that's a really solid call for newcomers trying to get into the game, and it gives you a lot of options without being overwhelming. So basically how it works is you have a 20-sided die, and that's going to calculate a lot of things in the game. So if you want to do a stealth check, you would roll that d20, and then if you have a higher stealth score than the person's perception score, you'd be hidden. So it's pretty cool. It simplifies things quite a bit, and then you have some modifiers depending on which skill, what action you're doing and stuff. What Baldur's Gate 3 does is that it automates that dice roll check with a lot of stuff, and then it also shows you how the roll works. So if you try to do a persuasion check, then you'll click the button and then the dice will roll and then add whatever modifiers, advantage if it's situational, whatever the case is, and then you see how the result is. It's pretty cool. It is a fun method of storytelling, but it's also a pretty fun video game too, because you can do some pretty wacky stuff in there. So the gameplay itself is really solid. They give you plenty of options for what you want to do. So if you like playing a wizard character, you have plenty of utility spells you can do in addition to damage spells, which is pretty cool. They give every single character, I believe, I certainly could be wrong, has the option to shove as a bonus action. So in combat, you have an action and a bonus action. An action is pretty much like your stereotypical, like if you want to do anything besides movement, movement is its own thing. So movement, action, bonus action. Bonus action is really light, and depending on which class you play, you can have more options. So if you're a rogue, you can do some extra stuff with your bonus action. But if you're not, you can still do a few things. Shove is really fun because you can push enemies, and you have a really low chance of doing it if you're not a strength class, but you can still do it anyway. Like, I had my wizard character have a 45% chance of pushing a goblin, and he was able to pull it off, and the guy just fell off the roof. It was great. So it acts as this cool sandbox, allowing you to do a bunch of different stuff, which is cool, and the rules are pretty consistent. So there are animals in the game, right? Where you can see like bears, maybe rats, or squirrels or something, and there's a spell that warlocks can get called Speak with Animals. And if you use that spell, any animal in the game you can talk to, and it's pretty cool. So it makes you think, oh, wait a minute, I wonder what they're all going to say. Baldur's Gate originally had developers for the first and second game that were pretty consistent. They were the same studio. I believe it was BioWare, old school BioWare, that was working on it. For the third game, it's up to Larian Studios, the people who did Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and some other games that I haven't quite played yet. Though Divinity Original Sin 2 was really good. I put over 100 hours in that game. Absolutely fantastic RPG. I think they were a very solid choice for Baldur's Gate 3. But what's pretty cool about it is that it feels like a sandbox where you can do a bunch of different things and you play with a bunch of systems, which is really exciting. The multiplayer is absolutely unhinged in the best way. When I saw the demo for Baldur's Gate 3, I was really impressed, but I was curious how that would work in a multiplayer aspect. Because when you look at those E3 trade shows, or whatever they're properly called, the multiplayer component, it looks cool, but it does not seem like how a game would work realistically. Like, you have, I think it was, what was it, Tom Clancy's Wildlands or Ghostlands, or, oh boy, I'm not really super into it. I believe it was Wildlands though, but you had it where those two guys were playing and he snipes the dude, and one of the presenters is like, thanks for having my back. You know I always got your back, bro. And it's just like that. I've never met someone who plays a game like that, where it felt kind of forced, and usually multiplayer in games is really messy. It's fun, and it's cool, but it is not as pristine as it's presented, so I was curious how that was going to work in a multiplayer department. So a couple buddies and I, we played some Baldur's Gate. We had played a little bit before. We did it right when the early access came out, when the servers were a little wacky, but we were still able to get it done. This is our second session with the campaign we're playing in, and it is pretty sweet. So one thing that's super cool about it that I like is that there's this village of druids that you can visit. There are some outsiders, there are some tiefling groups, and you can go around and talk to people. And I was so impressed how the game was able to have these cinematics for multiple people while we're all talking to different individuals in the town. It is absolutely insane. Like Divinity Original Sin 2, the previous game I played for them, had it when cutscenes would happen, it was more of an overhead. So you had it where you could see the characters from above and you could see the person talking, and you have text boxes. But here, it's actual cutscenes where you have people emoting and the camera's zoomed in and you have different camera angles depending on what's going on. There's the occasional bug where it says cinematic, it says continue, and it just says keep cinematic going, where it skips over some lines, which is a little wonky, but still incredibly solid. And the character animations for the game are absolutely insane. I am so impressed. There have been at least 7 moments where I look at how someone's emoting and I'm like, wow, this looks so good. There's a line from one of the best companion characters, Astarion. He has this thing where he's talking about decapitation and he goes, swing! He goes like that mid-cutscene, and it looks so good. I've never seen a game have like that amount of fluid cinematics. I'm used to I totally get why they do it, but more like the systematic cutscenes like in Mass Effect, where they have a preset amount that they cross arms or do one of these or whatever it is. But it seemed like a lot of these were really unique to the person you were talking to. There have been some where your character does cross your arms quite a bit in a variety of different cutscenes, but that one stood out, and there were 5 other ones that did too, that I can name off the top of my head, and it's insane. It's really cool. Gameplay-wise, it is really messy, it is chaotic in the best ways. So a buddy was trying to log in for our campaign. We were having some technical problems. So the 3 of us were shoving his character towards the edge of something, but the game wouldn't let us push him off, and we wouldn't want to do that. We're I wouldn't exactly say evil party, but we wouldn't want to hurt one of our friends. That would be such a bummer. But there was a bugbear assassin that was just chilling. He was chilling on a cliff, and it reached a point where the bugbear saw us. He jumped down. We're surprised because combat begins. He runs over, shoves our buddy off, and he almost goes unconscious. And it was so funny. It was a not scripted moment because that was a very organic thing we were doing. We were just messing around and then the game responded to it. It was super cool. And then there was another moment where there's this village you go to, right? You walk in, you see some dead adventurers, you go, wow, that's crazy, I sure hope nothing happens to us. And then you can get ambushed by goblins. Pretty rough. There are like 4 archers. You have 2 on the right side, 2 on the left side. You've got, I think, like a spellcaster lowered before. So they're trying to sneak up on you. It's a cool tactic. When I was doing it solo, I'm pretty sure I have footage of that, so I'll try playing it right now. But when I had that, my team and I got whooped pretty hard. If it wasn't for the fact that I picked a fighter and I just had to go guerrilla tactic, running in and cleaving them with a greatsword I had, I don't think we would have won. My spellcasters were getting sniped pretty bad. But in this multiplayer mode, one of my buddies, he was playing a character named Skippy. Skippy was I believe he was a gnome wizard. And while the cutscene began, while he's talking to our barbarian, Skippy sneaks up onto the roof and then climbs up to the top with 2 archers chilling there, staring down at the rest of the party. We try to sneak away, and before combat begins, Skippy shows up, lights a fireball, and just incinerates 2 of the archers right away. This combat encounter that solo-wise, when I'm controlling 4 other characters, took me a good 20 minutes. We finished it in 2 turns, so it was like 2 minutes. It was insane. It was chaotic. It was outstanding. The game is really cool, and then you can do a bunch of things interacting with your fellow players. So you can invade their inventory and maybe take a few things if you feel like they're being weighed down by their material possessions and you want to be a good Samaritan and lighten the load they carry. And then you can have conversations with people and then backseat while they're talking with NPCs, and then you can pick options to say, hey, you should click that one, that'd be pretty funny. It's super cool. The multiplayer aspect is quite solid. There's a few glitchy parts to it, but overall it is such a good time. And I'm really excited to make a proper campaign when the game properly comes out. Okay, so now I want to compare a little bit to Divinity Original Sin 2 to this. Gameplay-wise, I would say Baldur's Gate 3 is much more straightforward because with Divinity, when you make a character, you can pick a variety of classes, but it doesn't really have a class system per se. It's more of a template of what you want to do. And then as you keep playing, you could put more skill points into certain sections, and then those will maybe have you be better at fire spells, or maybe if you want to do more warfare, you can mix and match. Like I made a Blood Knight character where I focused on warfare, which bumps up your melee damage and gives you some cool like knockdowns and physical status conditions based off weapons, bleeding, stuff like that. And then I paired that with necromancy, so I could heal myself when I took the blood of enemies, which was kind of cool. It was a custom class. We didn't get very far with it, the people I was playing with when we made that, but still really cool that the game let me. Baldur's Gate is following the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, so you pick class. If you want to be a fighter, you pick a fighter. If you want to be a spellcaster, you pick a spellcaster class, like a sorcerer or a wizard. A couple classes do have it where they have martial capabilities, but their subclass lets them do spells. So a rogue can be an arcane trickster, or a fighter can be an eldritch knight where you use some powerful evocation spells, maybe a little bit of utility, but your bread and butter is going unga bunga hit thing. Pretty cool. So it feels like it's more of a easier out of the 2 games that you can jump into Baldur's Gate 3 and go, oh, okay, I get it. And it's presented pretty straightforward. Some of the stuff can be a little confusing if you haven't played it before, but out of the 2, I think that's the easier game to get into. They've really upped up a lot of the production quality. And on that note, I want to transition to a little bit of the story, but I just want to talk about the premise and a sort of critique I have with the game, a game that hasn't even come out yet, so it could be proven wrong for sure. But at this current time, I do want to mention the game's scale is interesting. It seems to be focusing on at least the demo, getting up to about level 4. And hold on, I'm gonna pull out my player's handbook real quick to reference something, if you will. Okay, so it seems to be focusing on the first tier of adventuring, at least for the early access. I did hear mention that Baldur's Gate 3 is not going to cover all the tiers of play, and tiers of play is basically the scale of what you're going for. So the first tier is level 1 to 4. This is the baby stuff. Like, this is fighting bandits, fighting goblins. It's pretty low-key in stakes, where you are covering smaller scaled adventures, so they're not super grand. It's just small stuff. And then if you move on to something like the 4th tier, which is the highest tier, that is the world-ending events. That if you're adventures or heroes or villains, this is the world-changing stuff. So 4th tier is the super, super big deal stuff. This is when you're like fighting gods in a JRPG. It's crazy. And then you have the ones before it where you're starting to get the hang of your spells, get the hang of your class, you're encountering things like beholders and powerful monsters and getting cool rare items and stuff. But what I find interesting is that Baldur's Gate 3's scale, you're starting at level 1, but its scale, it feels like it's like tier 4 or 3. It's pretty insane, because the whole game centers around the fact that you and the possible companion characters are abducted by mind flayers, and mind flayers are these spell-casting guys who have these crazy like tentacles out of their mouth. They're pretty funky. They're crazy stuff. And you're going through a process called seramorphosis. It's this process where the mind flayers put a tadpole in your head, and it's slowly transforming you into a mind flayer. And if you don't do something about it, you'll become one of them. The CGI cutscene that first plays is this insane thing going on at Baldur's Gate. I believe it's Baldur's Gate, where their ship just flies in and they start abducting people. It is crazy, scale-wise. And then the tutorial is you and a companion character or your multiplayer buddies, whatever you're doing, have to get off the ship. And then you crash land onto the Forgotten Realms where the game takes place, and your adventure begins. And your motivation is to get the tadpole out of your head, or you become a mind flayer. All the while you're trying to figure out if getting rid of it's a good idea, or maybe you're getting some kind of sweet mind reading powers, so maybe you should keep it and just figure out how you want to control it. I don't know, that's your call. But my narrative critique with it is you're level 1. Like, you are baby stuff. It feels really crazy and a little insane that a level 1 character is going through mind flare ships traveling to the 9 hells and Githyanki and red dragons, and they're flying around. And you can even, if you want to, kill a demon on the ship. So there's this thing where just before the tutorial ends, the mind flayer says, hey, you gotta press that button and we gotta get out of here. But if you have some buddies, you can fight the commanding demon guy that's fighting the mind flayer, and he has a flaming greatsword. And a couple of my buddies did a playthrough where they were wondering, I wonder what would happen if we kill him. Do we get anything? At that early time for the early access, you didn't get anything. However, in the most recent thing, the 4 of us with the mind flayer, who is not aggro to us unless there are no other enemies left, where he goes, wait a minute, you guys are acting a little funky, but he can attack. So he's dealing some good chunk of damage, and the 4 of us are teaming up on this guy using our skills, spells, martial prowess, whatever we're doing. And if you kill him, you get a flaming greatsword, which is such a cool, hey, if you wanted to try it, you could do it. But again, we're level 1. In Baldur's Gate 1, what was really cool, and the second one too, is how the game felt like the journey of your character. In the first game, one of the first quests you can do is fight rats in a basement. It's a really standard, really, really baby stuff, where if you're not properly equipped, those rats will kill you. But it was to show that your character isn't this grizzled adventurer. They are just a beginner who's lived in the sheltered walls of Candlekeep most of their life. And now going out into the open world is dangerous. It's scary. It has adventure and there's fun, but it's also a place that can get you killed if you're not careful. And Baldur's Gate 2 is it seemed like it was more of a tier 3 and 4, where you're starting to get a divine destiny and you're starting to take on way greater threats. And it made the adventure your character's on so satisfying, because that first game was so low key in what you did. And then Baldur's Gate 2 is now this grand adventure with this personal antagonist that you have beef with. It's cool. You feel this progression that feels really earned, and when you get up to that part, it feels so natural. With Baldur's Gate 3, it really feels like you're thrown into it at this really high crescendo, and it just feels odd and strange for the tier of play it seems like the game's going for. And it evens out when you start fighting goblins and stuff. But it's also with the companion characters too, where they all have backstories, and I will say they're all pretty cool. Some of them are very skeptical of you, so they're not going to warm up to you right away. Like there's a girl, Shadowheart, who is very, very suspicious. And if you try asking her questions about stuff, she deflects and she's kind of mean. But it makes sense. You guys have just met a couple days ago. She's not going to immediately be your buddy through this. I imagine as the game goes on, it makes the friendship you have with your companions feel earned. You've earned their trust because you have adventured together. You have grown this bond that is not just automatically implied as soon as you meet each other. But it's strange because it really seems like these characters are not level 1. You have Lizelle, who's this Githyanki. She's got plate armor, she's a fighter, she's got like a greatsword. She's like this tribe, or like this group of Githyanki. They're like these warriors trying to fight the mind flayers they have beef with. But again, you're level 1. And it feels really weird that gameplay-wise, they're supposed to be just as weak as the person who's just decided or just embraced their class, but they already have this rich experience backstory. Like the wizard Gale will talk about how he's a renowned scholar and he's done all these things, and then you just keep thinking, you're level 1, dude. Like that is insane. Level 1 is like your starting point, and with a backstory, it's great to have, but again, you are experiencing this type of life for the first time. And it feels like they wrote these characters with these rich backstories, but they didn't write that this is supposed to be at the start of their journey. And like with Astarion, I can totally get it because Astarion is a vampire spawn who's been working for a stronger vampire, and then this tadpole thing happens and now he can walk in the daylight and he's like, whoa, what is going on? This is crazy. And I totally get that. His backstory makes sense in that regard. He is a lesser vampire and he's trying to get stronger, and you go, yeah, okay, that's pretty solid. And then there's a character named Will who's pretty cool. He's got this title, the Blades of Frontier, but he's also level 1, and you're like, dude, wow, you guys must have pages of backstory. I'm curious though, because while I'm nitpicking it now, and it seems like the scale is much grander than the stakes of what we're going for, it could be a really rewarding process that when the full game comes out, it makes the backstory character quest lines have this additional weight to it because they started off in a very unique circumstance and not just beginner adventurer. It could be pretty cool. It could work out. I will say at this tier of adventure, it feels way too fantastical to me. But then again, that's just me. That doesn't mean it has to be for anybody else. I just wanted to share my thoughts on it. But that's what I gotta say about the early access so far. I am really enjoying it. I'm looking forward to playing more about it, and I'm so excited when August 31st comes around and the game properly releases, which, fingers crossed, I really hope it does. If they push it back, I could totally get that too. I'm all for a game taking as long as they need to do, having a solid release. And I'm all for people taking their time with that, as long as they don't run out of money in the process of doing so, and they're able to release a quality product that everyone in the development team can be proud of, in addition to not having to absolutely destroy their lives to make it. I'm all for that. But if it does come out, that's going to be pretty cool. I'm going to take a good chunk of time to play that before I ever talk about it, but I would love to talk about the full release when it comes out. Maybe a review, maybe more than that, I'm not quite sure. But anyways, those are my thoughts on Baldur's Gate 3's early access. Thank you so much for watching. I hope it was fairly enjoyable to you. I hope you were able to get some fun out of it, or maybe you have critiques of your own, maybe you've played the early access for it, in which case, feel free to share below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're all doing well. Pretty sweet too that Fear and Hunger video has popped off pretty hard, so thank you. I know not every video is going to do that, and that was the equivalent of lightning striking. The likelihood of that is absolutely insane. I have no idea what I've done to deserve it, but it seems the algorithm has decided to bless me this one time. If you've seen that, thank you so much for watching it, and thanks for watching this. I hope you guys have an awesome rest of the day, and I'll see you around. Take care.